Welcome. I've been thinking a lot about something that happened in our game last week as I make preparations for tomorrow night's game. What was, let me, a little bit of a background on this, which of course relates to the thumbnail of this video. For the last several weeks, since I originally approached my players and we had this conversation about how I wanted to return more agency to the players and I wanted to be more immersive and really explore the role play element of this role playing game hobby that we all enjoy so much. And since then, we've taken a fairly significant step away from maps that I've prepared in advance for the party or for the game that the players all can see. That's something, because we've used in the past a huge variety of maps, and this is something that took a lot of my prep time. We've done all sorts of things. I'm just going to list off some of the things that we've done. Maybe you can check it off if you've done this too. For a while, we had a large screen TV that I had set up on the game table so that we could use in a modern setting. We used Google Earth. That was kind of cool because we could zoom right into to houses, street view. We can zoom out to. It was kind of exciting. We've used virtual tabletops, so I've experimented a lot. Even going so back as to do Map Tools, which is a very old piece of software, but I cut my teeth on that one and learned all of the shortcuts and how to do masks and how to do line of sight and lighting and all of that sort of thing. We went from there to more of a polished but rather expensive virtual tabletop. I've done digital maps that I've just found either on the internet or what have you. Drive-Through RPG has assets that you can get that are digital assets that you could use. So we've done that. I've done flip mats as well as those card style maps that you could get from Paizo, all sorts of things there, especially wagons, boats, but forest scenes, all sorts of things, different types of buildings, village squares, all of that. We also from that, we decided that we were going to experiment with no grid. And so I purchased a large roll. We used to call it newsprint. It's not actually newsprint. I wouldn't recommend newsprint because newsprint, if you get a big roll of newsprint, although it's fairly inexpensive, especially if you just go down to your local newspaper, if you still have one of those, and you could just talk to the ladies at the front and they'll have like the roll ends that they have to change out, but there's still quite a bit of paper on there. Usually you can just give them some beer money and they give you those. But the problem with newsprint is that it has a bit of as you handle it, there's some like a black residue or something that comes from the newsprint, which can be a bit messy. So I don't necessarily recommend that. But I bought a roll of paper so that I could draw out maps. So we've done hand-drawn maps. Usually the hand-drawn maps are so that we don't use a grid, so we can move away from a grid. I give you all that information just to say that I don't have this inherent hatred for maps. I've used maps a lot, but as part of this experiment, as we've been moving more towards immersive play, we decided, let's see what we can do without them. Let's see if we can practice this theater of the mind, encouraging players to use their imagination, helping me as the person running the game to really think about my descriptions, make them engaging enough that players want to be in the scene. They want to do that, and also enough detail so they don't have to ask me a bunch of questions. And does it have this? Does it have that? I just encourage players. Well, if you think it has that, then you start moving around your character in the world such that perhaps you do look for that, or whatever it is. So at any rate, I just give you all of that information because I think it's necessary for you to hear that so that you understand what happened in the game last week, which has got me all excited. So I do encourage players to take notes at the game. I think that's a good thing, and I do think that it encourages more engagement. I'll go so far as to buy little notebooks for my players and give them fancy erasers and pencils or what have you. I know that sounds a little infantile, but I kind of like getting stationery. I like stationery. So I give everybody these tools and then encourage them to make notes. And so I always feel a little good when I feel good when I'm saying something and I'm giving a description, or one of my characters is speaking and I notice that someone's writing something down. I think, oh, good. They're paying attention. They're engaged. That happened again last week, which isn't that unusual. But what was unusual is that the player in question was not just making a note; he was making a little sketch for himself. The setting, the scene that we were in, the players were. It was kind of a riff on 3:10 to Yuma, the plot line of that. So there's this dangerous criminal that has to be delivered alive for justice to be done. And of course, this dangerous man has resources and allies, and they're trying to rescue him. And he also has enemies that are trying to kill him. And the player characters are tasked to somehow get him safely to where he needs to go so that he can face the music. And they're camped in a forest. They couldn't quite get all the way to where they needed to be, so they're camped there, and then there's an ambush as his gang catches up to the party, and there's demands made, and then a gunfight ensues. And I tried to give enough description so that there's, without giving an exhaustive description, because I'm encouraging players to help create the scene as they interact with the scene. But I just thought it was really cool that in a Theater of the Mind game that a player would take the initiative to just sketch it out a little bit so he can be right on it when it's his turn, comes up with as part of the round, as the rounds continue and he comes up to him, he's kind of mapping it out. And what I think is cool about this is that that's his map. And it's not necessarily the same as the map that I had in mind. I think it's important that I have a bit of a map in mind so I can be fair with who's taking fire and who's not, and where the bad guys are. And I'm not cheating it out. I'm not actually placing minis or anything, but I have an idea of what the scene is. But I guess I was excited because the other players afterwards, we were talking about what happened, and everyone was turned out that everyone really liked the scenario, and we had a great time, a lot of fun. And the other players had maps in their head as well, but their maps were slightly different than the map that he had written. But they were enough that it wasn't incongruent. Like you could still interact with the other players, and didn't so much matter if the tree was exactly there or if the tree was somewhere else. It was still, from the player perspectives, it was a little different. And that made me think, that's actually that may be quite realistic, because in the chaos of a battle at night, an ambush, it's easy to be turned around. It's easy to think, no, I thought that was over there. No, it wasn't over there. It was over here. And it replicates that well by not having a map, but then having the players think in their mind, okay, well, I can kind of create a map. Now, I don't expect my players to all sketch out a little map, but I do think it's almost like it's a bit of a tangent, but several years ago, we had a player that had been involved and had actually worked as an editor for several versions of the official Dungeons and Dragons. And he ran a game for us, which I appreciated. I usually don't get a break. And so for a break for me, he ran a game. And he said to us right at the beginning, and it was a bit of a shock for those of us that aren't used to this. He said, okay, so this is an old school style game that I'm running, which means that if you want a map, you have to draw it. And he had a map, of course, with the module that he was doing or what have you. And I thought that was interesting. We were like, oh, okay, that's different. So we may have just been stumbling back into something that has been a long term or a long accepted practice of the game. But I guess that the takeaway for me is that, a map is not heresy to Theater of the Mind style game, perhaps, especially if the map is something that's being created by each player in their head, and in some cases sketched roughly on a scratch piece of paper, some little scratch pad, notepad where they're doing, which is really good. And it allowed that player to use his imagination to kind of populate the scene as it made sense to him, and it still made sense for everyone else. And as he acted with that higher resolution that he had created of the scene, then other players are able to adopt that resolution for their own maps. And so it's a what's the term for that? So it's this it's a virtuous circle sort of thing. So it's building on itself and building on itself and building on itself, and the scene is increasing in resolution as each player takes their turn and creates this map, and in some cases even an actual drawn map. I thought it was fantastic. I'm going to experiment a little bit with the mapping side of things for tomorrow, as part of this ongoing quest to deliver this very dangerous man to justice. They've reached the railhead. They're just boarding the train. And so what I did is I sketched out, not to scale or anything like that, I just sketched out on a big piece of white paper the various train cars. And I didn't try to get detailed into I just put the train cars there. Here's the engine, there's the caboose, here's the other cars in between. And we're just going to see if we can still be theater of the mind for the most part, but have that train as a visual reference, but not at a high resolution, so that it's encouraging perhaps players to be a little too lazy in their efforts to draw out the world, to create the world. I'm going to see how it goes. It's an experiment, but because as I mentioned before, we haven't been using maps really, at least not maps that I've shown all of the players at once. I still have a map in my head, of course, always, but the map in my head changes according to what the players are saying. So it's a little bit of that. I don't know. That kind of sounds like cheating, but I'm not doing that to create I'm not trying to just get the players with that, like gotcha moves. I'm not much of a gotcha style game master. Where was I going with that? Oh, well, it's getting late here, and I'm just, as a grown man, I was just coloring downstairs, which sounds a little silly. Well, we'll see how it goes. I'll let you know how that is, but yeah, this idea that who draws the map. Well, I like the idea that I'm drawing the map. Each player is drawing the map, and isn't it interesting how the variations between them, but the encouragement that gives players to exercise that imagination, to really put themselves in the scene, as it were, as these characters. Anyway, as you can tell, I'm pretty excited about it, but I'll let you know how it goes. Thank you so much for watching my video. And yeah, maybe share your thoughts. I watched a great video from Primeval. Oh, I'm going to get your name wrong. Hold on. I've got to get your name right. Oh, it's a great channel. I really like it. What is it here? Primeval Fantasy. I'll link the video in the description below. He was talking about maps as well, and miniatures as well. Just fascinating. I really appreciated his take on that. He's very well spoken. He doesn't ramble like yours truly, but well, you get what you get. But I watched his video. It had me thinking. I commented, I was going to talk about that too. So this is my take on the maps and the theater of the mind, the really role playing of it, and how we can role play with the map even, which I mean, maybe I'm going too far with that, but at any rate, it was it was a lot of fun, and I appreciate watching this video. Please give me a comment what your experience is with maps. You just always do the 5-foot grid or the hex or what have you. Everyone sees the same map, or do you keep the map hidden from the players? You just give them the description. The responsibility is theirs to draw it out. It's a very old school approach, or maybe a hybrid of the two. Always like your comments. Please leave a comment below. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching my video. Bye.